Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started shortly. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, everybody. I see folks are logging in. Thanks so much for joining us. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in a few more seconds. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Isis Lopez, and I am the Engagement Manager for Development Services Department here at the City of Austin. Today is the second session of our newest community focus series that we are calling DSD Info Series. So this is a very new series to Development Services Department, and here we're offering both in-person and virtual classes, and those series is all about our services, it's all about our programs, and we offer guidance from our experts in our departments. Today, we are going to be talking about building under home, but I want to talk a little bit about the series. The first one we had a few weeks ago, we talked about where to get started in the permitting world. If you haven't had a chance to look it up, you can check it out. We have a recording of it. All of our series, including future ones, are under publicinfo.com/DSD info series. And we have a few coming up on home. Today, we are going to be talking about the 2-unit and 3-unit specifically, also known as home phase ones. We have folks here. We have John Bowman and we have Alyssa Mayfield from Development Services. We also have folks from other departments who are ready to answer any questions that you have. We have the subject matter experts who are going to be talking about it, who are going to be walking you through what it is and things that you need to know. And we have several other ones specifically for home coming up. And we also have other ones we have another one in April that is all about spring cleaning. And so for that one, we have folks from code compliance to let us know about what code violations to look out for as spring gets started. So make sure to check out, that is publicinput.com/DSD info series. We'll put it in the chat so you can take a look at it and attend upcoming sessions. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So before we get started on our presentation and from our subject matter experts, John and Alyssa, I want to make sure y'all know what to expect. So we have a presentation from our 2 subject matter experts today from Development Services Department, or you'll hear DSD too. Followed by, you'll have an opportunity for questions and answers throughout the presentation. If you have a question something you didn't understand or something that you want more information on, feel free to put it in the Q&A portion of Zoom. So if you look at your Zoom options in the bottom, there's a Q&A bank, and you can go ahead and put it there, and we'll address it toward the end, and we'll make sure to take a look at those. There's 2 ways that you can ask at the Q&A portion. You can raise your hand or use the raise hand portion on the control panel, or you can, again, write them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Some folks try to put it in the chat, and we like to use it in the Q&A function because that helps us keep track of which ones we've answered, and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. We might not have all the answers, but at the end, we'll collect all of our questions, and for those folks who signed up, we'll go ahead and send y'all a summary of those questions. If you are having issues with any of those functions, feel free to send us a chat and we'll get that figured out for you as well. So go ahead and put it in the chat, and we have staff here and teammates here who can help you get that Q&A function or figure out how to raise your hand. I'd also like to note that this meeting is being recorded. And so you will have access, folks who registered will have access to the recording, and folks who registered will also have access to the information that we provided here. But also we're uploading all of our recordings to that public input page that I mentioned in the beginning, and that's publicinput.com/DSD info series. We're so excited to bring this series to you. and tell you all about everything that all of our services and all the information that we feel will be super helpful for our community. So we're excited to get started. Again, if you have any questions or technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat portion and let us know. All right, and with that, I will introduce Alyssa Mayfield, who will get us kicked off with today's presentation and program. Alyssa?
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm Alyssa Mayfield. Today, we're going to spend our time talking about what is commonly known as Home One. We'll talk about what it is, a bit of history, and when it was passed and its purpose, in addition to key terminology, updated standards, and a technical overview, followed by a question and answer portion. We will also overview the different phases and what they mean. So let's get started. Next slide. Okay, let's talk a bit about how we got here and what HOME is. HOME stands for Home Options for Mobility and Equity, or also known as Austin's Home Options for Middle Income Empowerment. These code amendments are among a series of updates to the city's Land Development Code, also known as the LDC. The LDC governs land use regulations in our city, dictating what can be built, where it can be built, and how much can be built. It has undergone numerous amendments since its adoption in the mid-1980s, responding to changing policy goals. In July of 2023, City Council passed a resolution to facilitate the availability of smaller, more diverse housing types and to allow more housing units on single-family lots. It focused on the creation of infill development options for single-family neighborhoods. The goal of these changes is to provide more housing types and increase housing supply within single-family zoned areas of Austin. The target population is lower and middle income homeowners. Before HOME, previously 3 units were not allowed on SF1, 2, or 3 zone lots, and rezoning would be required. Next slide. In addition to the history of the goal and purpose of HOME, we also wanted to overview a bit of the timeline of when things were implemented. The changes are relatively new, and we are excited to continue spreading educational resources about them. Phase 1 was adopted on December 7th, 2023, and went into effect on February 5th, 2024. Phase 2 was adopted on May 16th, 2024, and went into effect August 2025. But today we will be overviewing the changes that are part of the first phase. We will have several other sessions scheduled to go into phase 2 in detail as well. Next slide. As we talk more about what HOME phase 1 entails, we want to make sure we cover some key terminology that we'll be talking about. So the terms we have here, and they'll be helpful to know: gross floor area is the total enclosed area of all floors in a building measured to the outside surface of the exterior walls. That does not include garages or porches. Dwelling unit, home that provides facilities for residents to live, sleep, eat, and cook independently. Floor area ratio, which sometimes gets mixed up with gross floor area. It regulates how big structures can be. FAR is the ratio of gross floor area to the site to the area of the site. And then impervious cover is any type of human-made surface that doesn't absorb rainfall, such as rooftops, driveways, or patios. Next slide. Here are also some examples of lot uses that we'll be referring to throughout this presentation. So here we have a single unit, 2 unit, duplex, and 3 unit. Next slide. So some highlights. Phase 1 only applies to duplexes, 2 unit residential, and 3 unit residential uses. It means it allows up to 3 units, including tiny homes, on most single-family zone properties. It revised regulations that apply to housing, two housing units. The new regulations do not apply to single-family residential use, which will continue to be reviewed under existing regulations, including Subchapter F. And then it removed the restrictions on the number of unrelated adults living in a housing unit. From a zoning perspective, a tiny home will be reviewed as another dwelling unit. I will now go over relevant changes to the Land Development Code. Next slide. So a new three residential unit was introduced to the Land Development Code, subsection B of Code Section 2523, and it states 3-unit, excuse me, 3-unit residential use is the use of a lot for 3 dwelling units other than a mobile home. So previously, 2 units were only allowed, but this ordinance allows up to 3 on a site. And the 3 units can be in any combination and may or may not fall within the scope of the IRC. Next slide. And then here's some changes that are related to 2 units. Previously, duplexes required a 7,000 square foot lot, and that was reduced to 5,750 square feet. And the second unit had a limit with a max of 1,100 square feet. So it increased the building size maximums and reduced the limits in lot sizes. Next slide. So some of the restrictions that were removed were in the number of unrelated adults allowed to live together in a housing unit. And previously, there was a limitation to a max of 4 and 6 unrelated adults within certain areas. Note that occupancy limits are still enforced through technical building codes, not through zoning codes. So this reduces those restrictions, allowing people who are not related to live in a housing unit together. Next slide. Okay, where to find the changes in the code? You can find them on the table at 252491, which is the permitted use charts. It added additional base districts where duplex use and 2-unit residential uses are allowed. It added 3-unit residential use to the table and makes 3-unit residential use permitted in certain base zoning districts. The P in this case stands for permitted. The summary being mainly is that you can now have a duplex 2-unit and 3-unit in SF1, SF2, and SF3 zones. Next slide. So where you can find these code changes and some of the ordinance documents overall is in 252773, duplex residential use, which was repealed and replaced to include the new duplex 2-unit residential use, 3-unit use. And then section 252774, 2-family residential use was repealed. So that would have covered secondary dwellings, which is what they were previously known as. And these 2 sections talk about the specific changes that were made to the code. And it consolidated the 2 and 3 uses into one code section. Next slide. These diagrams show the key differences between home phase 1 and 2. On the left, you can see 3 units on one lot with no property lines between the units. These units can be owned by a single owner or have a condo regime that allows separate ownership of the structures and shared ownership of the land. On the right, home 2 allows for individual units on individual parcels. While the home phase 2 ordinance is primarily a zoning change, the first step of most projects will actually be subdivision of the lots. Details about phase 2 will be overviewed in late April. Next slide. So here's some additional key changes. We defined what tiny home is, and it means a dwelling unit that is 400 square feet or less in floor area, excluding loft space. And then it modified residential uses. It changed 2-family residential to 2-unit residential and added 3-unit residential, as we are moving away from using the term family and going towards unit. Next slide. So here's some possible combinations. For 3 units, we have 3 single-family detached residences, a duplex, which could also have a 3rd unit in the rear or the front, 1 townhouse building comprised of 3 townhouse units, and then 1 triplex. Triplexes are regulated by the IBC and have to comply with a policy memo through that can be submitted through residential plan review, and John will go over more details of that code later. Next slide. So here's just some plan view and section view of what 3 units can look like. The first one is the side-by-side, which ends up being more akin to a townhouse, depending on how the units are separated. And then we also have the section view showing 3 units of buildings being stacked, which would be more like a triplex and would be reviewed following some of the IBC standards. Next slide. Okay, what are site development standards? These are standards for all sites for these uses. And this is a summary table of the new site standard or site development standard changes as a result of Home One. The table is in City Code Section 252492, and it is amended to change the maximum number of dwelling units per lot in certain base zoning districts. It can also be, these limits can also be found in 252773. And it mainly just goes over which zones, the lot size minimum, as you can see, the setbacks, and some of the impervious cover and height requirements. Next slide. So here's just a quick overview of what an updated setback standard would be for these projects. So we'll go over what is a setback. A setback line means a line within a lot parallel to and measured from a corresponding lot line, forming the boundary of a yard and governing the placement of structures and uses on the lot. For most lots, these are the standard setbacks that will apply to the site. Do note here that street side setbacks vary based on the street level and distance, and then rear setbacks vary based on what the use of the lot to the rear is. Next slide. Some requirements from Subchapter F, also known as the Residential Design and Compatibility Standards, still apply. So in 252773, it established that the FAR would be limited in these areas. And so it regulates the size of the new residential construction, remodels, and additions. And then it sets some maximum floor area, building envelope, and some design standards for new development. The majority of projects are within the Subchapter F limits, which we will cover, but there are those that are outside of these boundaries, which don't have those FAR limits. And to find out if your property is within Subchapter F, you can use the Property Profile tool, which is a public website, to find out your zoning. Next slide. So some unit size regulations. This chart overviews the unit size regulations. Any individual unit may not exceed the greater of 2,300 square feet or 0.4 floor area ratio. 2 units may be the greater of 3,200 square feet or 0.55 FAR of the lot. The maximum unit size is the greater of 2,300 square feet or 0.4. Except for an existing dwelling unit, the unit can't exceed the greater of 0.4 2,300. And then 3 units may be the greater of 4,350 square feet or 0.65 FAR. The maximum unit size still staying at 2,300 square feet or 0.4 FAR. And again, except that existing dwelling units can't exceed also the greater of 0.4 and 2,300, or 2 units cannot exceed, existing 2 units cannot exceed more than 0.55 or 3,200 square feet. This is an example of what a 3-unit townhouse might look like on a site. And so you see the zoning SF3, the lot size minimum 5,750, the unit size for each of them being 1,300, and then the max FAR for that lot being 0.65. And again, each of those units not being over 0.4 individually. For more information, there is a home landing page that goes through how things are applied and the different home amendments. And we will be sharing this in other resource links. Next slide. So some of the design standards that are put in place for Home 1 are garage placement, porch placement, fire separation, and impervious coverage and parking placement. The ordinance details porch projection allowances into the front yard setback. It limits the impervious cover to 40% or no more than 4 parking spaces in the front yard. And then it also sets regulations that minimize the mass and impact of garages. If the parking structure is greater than 20 feet behind the building, then building facade, no action is needed. If it is less than 20 feet, the width of the parking structure may not exceed the width of the facade. Do know that this is different than the neighborhood garage placement tool as prescribed in 25-2-1604. And one thing to note is that if a property is located within a neighborhood plan that has also adopted the garage placement tool, the neighborhood plan will supersede 25-773 in regards to 2 units. 3 units would still be under the 25-773 code as the neighborhood plans did not take into account the possibility of 3 units being an option in the future. Next slide. So any property within the city is required to have an address for emergency purposes. So every dwelling needs to have a unique address. So in a 2-unit, so duplexes, usually have an A and a B, but now we've come down to where a corner lot might have 2 houses and be addressed off of Live Oak and the other side addressed off of Crockett. And so it would need to have those 2 addresses requested from addressing before submitting so that it doesn't delay the approval of any projects. And you can reference the addressing webpage for how to request an address. Next slide. These are sections that were removed from the code. So 25-901 accessory apartments is no longer a permitted use, which would have been an attached apartment for somebody who is 65 or older or physically disabled or not able-bodied, and so that was removed. And then subsection D and E of 25-893 no longer permits guest houses or on-site worker housing as accessory uses to primary. Next slide. One thing that was added is the voluntary preservation bonus. So if you choose to do this, it allows you to build more square footage. Projects that are subject to unit size limitations are eligible to use the preservation bonus outlined as part of Home 1. And then you can see here there's some requirements that need to be met and alteration requirements. Again, it is voluntary, it's not required, but it does allow you to build more if you have an existing unit, and saves that structure from being demolished and put into landfill. And so there's some requirements that you have to meet. So units that are, let's see, here it is. Projects are subject to unit size limitations. So an existing house that's 20 years old may preserve the square footage and it does not count towards FAR. And so for houses that were built in 1960 or earlier, there are requirements to preservation of the existing dwelling unit and facade. And then for structures that are 20 years or older, you just have to save 50% of the existing walls. As part of implementation, staff has developed guidelines for the preservation bonus and is in the process of adopting rules and the criteria manuals related to a required restrictive covenant, notifying future buyers of the use of the preservation bonus on the property, and a structural verification report to ensure viability of the preserved structure. Next slide. An amendment to the preservation bonus is currently going through the legislative process. The revision will allow 2 units to obtain a FAR of 0.65 or 4,350 square feet if an existing unit is preserved instead of 55 FAR, which is currently written. This amendment is scheduled to go before council on April 24th, which is in a couple of weeks. And so if you want to see what the potential changes are, you can go to this website for further information about when it will be discussed on council. Next slide. Okay, so with Home 1, council directed us to document the data that we were finding from these projects. And so as part of Home, we are analyzing the impact and outcomes of the initiatives. We are tracking applications reviewed, proposed new units, numbers approved, like the FAR of each unit, and which houses have used preservation bonus. And this information reflects the most recent numbers from February 5th, 2024 to April 7th. And so here we have 396 applications reviewed, 757 proposed new units, 301 applications approved, and 3 projects that use the preservation bonus. And so as it notes here, it's required to analyze the impacts and outcomes of the home initiative in the context of the city's infrastructure, housing, stock, and affordability, and ultimately climate goals. Also, one thing to note is this does not include any Home 2 small lot, single family lots. And now it will be handed over to John Bowman to go over the technical requirements.
Thank you, Alyssa. My name is John Bowman. I'm Plans Examiner Supervisor for Technical in the Residential Review. Alyssa talked about the requirements from the zoning perspective. Now I'll speak on the technical or building code side of things. The technical requirements are related to building and life safety standards, mostly for the 3-unit structures, which has been recently added. They're based on the International Residential Code, or IRC, and portions of the International Building Code, or the IBC. So if I use those acronyms, that's what they mean. Next slide, please. In order for structures to fall under the IRC, they can be no more than 3 stories above grade. So grade is ground level. If you have a basement, that is not counted towards those stories above grade. So that wouldn't disqualify using the IRC. Next slide. For all 3 units, a sprinkler system, automatic sprinkler system is required. As just as same as for townhouses. It's not required for duplexes or single families, but it's always encouraged just for safety issues. Next slide. So our main concern is fire separation between units. So in a triplex setup, it's very similar to a duplex, where each unit must be separated by either walls or floor ceiling assemblies that are rated for at least 1 hour of fire resistance. We use a time frame rating because not all materials react the same across the board in the event of a fire. So it's easier to have a standard of resisting a fire for a time frame versus certain materials. This barrier must be continuous from either the floor to the roof deck, or from one exterior wall to another exterior wall. And I'm into like floor slab, not floor, but any structural elements like beams or columns that are either supporting other units or supporting structural members of other units must be that 1 hour fire resistance or greater, to avoid them being compromised and the entire thing collapsing. Next slide. We do allow a shared egress. So the doors for that shared egress must be rated for at least 45 minutes. And side windows are not allowed if they're right next to that that door, and I'll get more into that here in a second. These exit doors must be equipped with self-closing and self-latching mechanisms, and they must lead directly to the outside or through a shared lobby that meets with the or that meets the R311.2 requirements in the IRC. Next slide. So all wall projections and overhangs, such as bay windows, roof eaves, etc., must follow fire separation requirements in how close they are to adjoined units or the property lines. All 2-family and 3-family still have to comply with the IRC table R302.1. Triplexes would be the bracket 2, which is with automatic sprinkler systems, and then 2 families can utilize R302.1 bracket 1. or parentheses 1, which does not have the automatic sprinkler systems. Next slide. Next slide. Um, Openings and windows. This includes windows, doors, vents, ducts, and any other penetrations are restricted on the fire rated walls. Between units and if they're staggered or uneven, to avoid a potential fire exiting one unit and being able to travel along the exterior wall into a neighboring unit. So next slide. And then the fire rated materials and review. We don't specify materials, only the testing standards put forth by ASTM or American Society for Testing and Materials. That would be E119 or UL263, which is done by Underwriters Laboratories. And again, those are test protocols, not specific materials. So they have a whole process where they test different wall assemblies and things to verify that they can withstand 1 hour of or at least 1 hour of continuous fire. Certain construction may require an alternative method of compliance, or AMOC, which is a form and then also a technical review. For all 3-unit triplexes, an AMOC form is required as per the city memo. The next slide. All right, I'll pass it back off to Isis. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Alyssa. So y'all heard from John Bowman and Alyssa Mayfield, who talked a little bit about, or overviewed what those changes were for home phase 1, and John talked about some of those technical requirements to still keep in mind as we are running through home. And we also wanted to resource, here's a chart, and we'll share it with the participants. We have a list of resources and links available for you, and so I'll overview briefly what those are. One of the links is the ordinance itself. We also have links to phase 2, the ordinance itself. Development Services has an overview of home. And so that details information about phase 1 and phase 2, including the development standards. There's also a public input page if you want to take a look at some of those historical amendment processes and what that went through those processes, including the larger land development code amendments on their public input page. Those will be available for our participants. Next slide, please. All right, so now we are at the question and answer portion. I want to remind everybody that this meeting was recorded, so all of the information that we talked about, that John and Alyssa talked about, will be available for folks who registered. We will also input it on our publicinput.com /DSC info series. So folks can take a look at that and take a look at what the presentation was. We have subject matter experts if they want to turn on their camera at this part of the meeting. We have folks from Development Services, but we also have some subject matter experts from our partner departments. We have folks here from Austin Water and from Austin Energy, if there's any questions related to that as well. To be able to participate, if you want to use the Q&A function on your Zoom chat that's located in the bottom, go ahead and ping us if you're having troubles accessing it, or feel free to also raise your hand and we will go ahead and call on you. I'll try to alternate between the Q&A function and the speaking portion. I'll go ahead and call on you if you have your hand raised in the moment. We'll start with speaking. I will also note that there have been some questions that have been asked throughout the presentation. You can take a look at the ones that have been answered. We have about 12 that have been answered. So take a look at those. We have folks here who have been typing those answers as the presentation has been going through. So make sure you check that out. If we don't get more questions, I'll overview them briefly, but I want to make sure I answer everyone's questions. And so we have one participant who raised their hand, and I'll go ahead and call on them. Nebi, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Welcome. I have here Nebi Sem is the username. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, I see your hand raised.
Hello.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you very much for this presentation. My question is regarding the preservation bonus. It seems like for properties older than 20 years, we are able to get, as long as we keep the existing property 50%, we qualify for the preservation bonus. Where I'm a little confused about is some distinctions that is made regarding the garage exemption. So if I remove the garage, demolish the garage, is that gonna count towards that 50% preservation requirement? Or because garage has been exempt, it is going to be exempt from that 50% rule as well, and I will have actually 50% demolishing for the registered square footage of the current FAR of the house.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think our subject matter experts don't have that answer for you right now, but we appreciate the question. Lindy, is there anything more you wanted to add about that at this moment? No, okay.
Yeah, we'll follow up.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, let me go. We have a scenario here, and right now I see you're typing an answer, so I'll go ahead and get reading on it if you want to answer it live. We have a participant that's asking if they're constructing a unit A now and plan to build a unit B at a later date under future condo regime. Is there any way they can proactively prepare for that during the current construction? Specifically, they run a sewer cleanout and underground electrical conduit for future unit B location, or possibly install a dual service panel on unit A now to accommodate a unit B down the line. That was a very specific question. Reina, do you have any advice for them?
Yes, so the answer to that, it depends, correct? If you already have a sewer and line, for example, and you want to add a clean out, that's definitely possible. But what you couldn't do proactively is install new service lines, whether it's water or wastewater, and just leave them there in the ground. And the reason being is that when you have unused services, let's say wastewater, you can end up allowing rainwater and other things go through that line if it's not being used, or, plans change and it never gets used. It's just a point of infiltration. And the same for the water. You have a water line laying there and it's not being used, and like plans change, then you have a potential for water leaks and water loss. And, water conservation is a big thing. So that will be case by case, and depends exactly what you're planning to do. And that's what I was trying to type here. It's just it's something that has to be evaluated on a case by case basis.
Okay, thank you so much, Reina, and thank you so much for asking the question. We have another question on the Q&A function. Does DSD know how many net units have been permitted with the home amendment? So for example, new permitted units, demoed units, existing units to remain. Do we have that information available? If not, we can follow up. Alyssa?
So on the tracking the impact, it does mention the proposed new units. The existing units to remain, some projects have not adopted the preservation bonus or used it. So there are projects out there that have an existing house and built a second one that we are tracking that, but I don't know if that is been compiled in the same way that proposed new units or applications being reviewed have been. And then we do also document the number of demolished units, but it is not shown like it was on the slide. So I can reach out to the person who has been tracking those or managing the document and see if that is information that can be provided.
Okay. Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you for that question, Hector. All right, we have another question, and this one's for Austin Water. So Reina, for Austin Water under Home 1, will each unit require a separate tap fee for water and sewer? Great question. This one's coming from Jeffrey.
Okay, so I'm not in the tax permitting office, which does the fee collection, but typically when you have a new resident moving into a house, they had to pay fees to get the water meter installed and the wastewater account going. And the reason it has to be a separate is for protection of the person living at that location, to ensure proper billing and ensuring that they receive the services they need.
Okay, thank you, Reina. We'll go ahead and double check that answer for you, but appreciate you giving us that context. All right, the next question is, does adding a new dwelling to the lot mean that a compliance with a new requirement for the water meter plus wastewater access within the lot, many are located within city easement? Would that be you, Reina, again? For the water
Yes.
meter, would that be the same thing?
For this one, it's more construction, and that's more my area. The engineer review. The utility criteria manual requires each individual dwelling unit to be individually metered, so it requires its own water meter. And again, this is for the protection of the resident at that house, at that unit, for proper billing. And when it comes to the easement, it will have to be a case-by-case basis. There is some easements that there is nothing else around it. There is no mains, and and the services are through that easement, and we might have to continue using them. Some of them are mains that they are in easements. They are planned to be relocated, so those mains will not be around much longer. So they might have to remove them, relocate them to the right of way to the street. It just depends.
All right. Thank you so much, Reina. And I see we have one hand up. I'm going to go ahead and call on them. So Hector Martel, welcome. Thanks for joining us. What is your question?
Hi, my question is about the unit limitations on flood hazard properties. Do these home amendments change any of those existing rules about limiting how you can, or not allowing adding additional units onto redeveloped flood properties?
So I can answer that just from experience with projects like this. The floodplain code does not allow multiple units. So this zoning code may allow multiple units, but if you are within the 100-year floodplain, like if the property is directly on it, you are limited to 1 unit. And that was not changed in the floodplain or the environmental criteria manual. That doesn't mean you can't have accessory structures, but that does not constitute a dwelling unit. But this home ordinance did not get rid of the floodplain limits of 1 unit per lot if it is in the 100-year floodplain.
Thanks so much, Alyssa and Hector. Thanks so much for tuning in and asking your question. I'm going to go to some of the questions that are in the Q&A function. All right. So we have someone who asked for the differences of a 3 or 2 housing unit without splitting lots versus ADUs mentioned earlier in the presentation. If not, what are the differences? So the differences between a 3 or 2 housing unit without splitting the lots versus the ADUs mentioned earlier. That be you, Alyssa?
Yeah, so we're getting rid of the term ADU, and so we're going to, single unit, 2 unit, 3 unit. And so you can have 3 separate units, or you can have a duplex and a second and a single unit on a lot. But there are no more ADUs. It's just 2 unit, 3 unit, duplex, single unit.
Got it.
I
Thank
don't
you
know
for
if
that
that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that clarification. And thanks for asking that question. All right, we have another one about addressing. So one of our attendees is asking, since all units must have a unique address, then should they also have a separate electric meter, correct? Andy, is that you?
Get off mute here. If they were talking about a single lot, they probably could do it as a 1 meter set. But we might have to follow up on that on our residential team to get a better answer for that. So we'll follow up
Okay,
with
yeah.
it. So
Absolutely. That's a great question. And that's why we have these questions, so that we can think about all the scenarios that our customers are having. And so appreciate that question. So we'll go ahead and double check that for you. And then we'll summarize those answers for our attendees. Let's see. I see we have another question. Were differences of a 3 or 2, or we already answered that one. I think we don't have any more questions. And so feel free to use the Q&A function if you still have some questions. I'll also like to remind y'all that we had some already answered. We had a few folks, a few of our attendees ask questions throughout the presentation, and some of our subject matter experts like John Richards went ahead and answered some of those questions, including garage spaces, net max questions we have in there, zoning lots and like setbacks. So very, very technical questions. And so we have also technical answers in there for you. These answers will also be part of the summary. And again, you can also use the raise hand function. All right, let's go to the next slide. As if I see that there's no more questions in our Q&A function, so I'll go ahead and share this. If you want to go ahead and share how we did with this presentation, we'll share the link, or go ahead and scan the QR code and let us know how we did. What you thought about this. This helps us shape future engagements. I would also like to share, if you want to join us for our next session, all of our sessions for the info series are available for you at publicinput.com/DSC info series. We have a few of them coming around for the home session, and I think we have time for maybe one more question. We see some coming in, so I'll leave this on the screen for y'all to fill out as we answer those questions. So we have 2, and I think they're specifically for Austin Energy. If we have an existing fence and an electrical telephone easement, how can we go about receiving Austin Energy to approval to keep this? Andy, is that something that you have available at this moment?
it depends on the scope of the fence. If it's just a standardized fence along the property lines, we're not concerned with that. If it goes into more of a structural component, like columns or retaining walls or anything of that nature, then they would have to look at a more holistic approach, what facilities we have there, and then what it's got planned for that particular lot.
Gotcha.
So it'll be handled through the review process.
Gotcha. Thank you, Andy. All right, so thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, we'll be having more of our sessions. We have a few more about home. So if this topic was of interest to you, we have 2 more coming up in the month of April. And then we also are going to be having a lot more about other topics, including code compliance, including just different topics that are available, and you'll get to meet our subject matter experts. I appreciate all of our subject matter experts in the room: Lindy, John, Alyssa, John Bowman, and John Richards, and Raina from Austin Water, and Andy from Austin Energy. And appreciate all of our attendees for joining us. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day, and we will be in touch. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.